वक्रातुण्डा महाकाया सूर्यकोटि समाप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देवा सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Thank you.
Namaste, Vanakkam, Namaskaram, and welcome to a very special program by the World Hindu Foundation, South Africa. In the last 2 weeks has witnessed mass mayhem, looting, and violence in South Africa, and the Indian community in the country have been severely affected, notwithstanding other communities as well. With the COVID pandemic, as well as the mass situation in the country whereby unemployment has risen tremendously, the poverty levels in the country have also grown enormously, notwithstanding the COVID-19 pandemic. Rioters came out in their hundreds across KwaZulu-Natal in particular, as well as parts of Gauteng, where they looted and robbed and damaged business in the country. Today, we are here with special guests, Srimati Anita Hariram, Professor Anand Singh, who is a professor at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in anthropology, as well as social activist Naren Ganesh. And I will introduce each one in a few moments specifically. And they're here today to share their views on what transpired, as well as to shed some light in some of the agendas at play perhaps, but also to pave the way forward for South Africans, and particularly for those minority communities who are living in fear. Tech, please can you play the first slide? So as we've seen, we know the aftermath of the riots and the looting and the violence has left many people in fear. Today, they are experiencing daily challenges of food shortages, lack of water supplies, etc. In a time when our democracy is tested, can we rise together and rekindle the lamp of unity? Today, we look back to the timeline of the past. Slide 2, please, Tech. Following the Constitutional Court judgment on the 29th of June that found former President Jacob Zuma guilty of contempt of court and sentenced him to 15 months in prison, KwaZulu-Natal, followed by Gauteng, slowly slipped into a state of anarchy. Whilst the first displays of unrest in the coastal province were directly linked to the incarceration of Zuma, the civil disorder quickly changed into widespread acts of looting and violence, leading to bloodshed. Riots and protests took place in South Africa from the 9th to the 17th of July in response to the arrest of former President Zuma. However, the unrest, which began in KwaZulu-Natal on the evening of 9th of July and spread to provinces like Gauteng on the evening of the 11th of July, shared something else. It was as if the country had come to war, and it has become a space of fault line South Africa. When the riots continued on the evening of Sunday, the 11th of July, multiple news sources indicated reports of gunshots and explosions heard at local malls and residential areas. But the violence quickly escalated, and by morning of Monday, the 12th of July, multiple companies and malls were forced to close following widespread looting and violence. As of the 21st of July, 276 people died due to the unrest, while 3,407 were arrested by the 18th of July. Initial estimates by the South African Property Owners Association puts the losses in excess of 20 billion rand. So, by 22nd of July, 337 people died in the unrest, while 3,407 was arrested by the 18th of July, and intimidation continues. Take slide 3, please. In this slide, we are going to look at a video that showcased the evening of Sunday when protesters took to the streets in Marion Hill. Please play the video.
Right, this is how it is currently, Marion Hill. Live gunshots being fired now here, all over the show. Right, burning. It's getting more and more violent, and there's still no SAPs on scene here. Nothing. Thank you, Alex.
What transpired was quite significant. In the gap between the police arriving as well as the army that was deployed later with very minimal resources, the community decided to take up arms and also protect the community. So we are going to be asking some very tough questions in today's program. And I'd like Tech to go to slide 4, please. We've received testimonies and testimonials of people who have suffered massive losses during this particular outbreak. It wasn't just breaking into somebody's home or breaking into a business and stealing certain items, but it continued over a period of time that left the country shocked and left the world reeling. The narrative today in the world is on racism. It's on Black against Indian, Indian against Black racism. Now, in this slide, we have one person from the Framed Edge in Springfield Park whose friend shares the pitiful state she's in today and how she's needing to pick up the pieces from her business, which was a frame where she owned a framing company. Tech, please play the voices 1 and 2. If you can.
The audio is not available.
Oh, okay. All right. No, not a problem. The idea that I want to share with you today, and also if we go to slide 4, is to show the devastation, the sorrow, the anarchy, as well as the various social media posts that had come in during the period in which people were experiencing the most amount of tremor and terror. At the same time, when people started asking questions, how did this event affect our lives? What is happening? Is it the same? Are we going to a journey together as a country? How do we get to that stage when we ourselves haven't come to terms with the death of Radesh or Ganeshji or Fabian or Desigan? Why would their lives be taken? Take a slide, the next slide, please. So these stories indicate that the trauma has only just begun. And today, in the last 2 days, the severity of the impact of race issues, especially in the public media space, and especially in the global media space, has left the Indian community reeling, or the so-called Indian community. And I must stress this because In South Africa, all communities are open to all citizens. Whilst we may have the predominance of one group of people in particular areas, it isn't necessarily that these are white areas or these are predominantly Indian areas. But for the sake of the discussion today, and this is where we're going to unpack some of the terminologies that's being used today in social media as well as in mainstream media, that actually renders particular communities very, very vulnerable. So can we play the last video before I go to Professor Anand Singh?
One sector, one bullet, one bullet, one sector, one Indian, one bullet, one Indian, one bullet, one bullet, one Indian. March, Raman, Jamuna, Jamuna, March! Thank you very much. Comrades. Thank you very much.
Very difficult scenes and very challenging scenes that we've witnessed. These scenes have caused a lot of fear in South Africans. It's pivoting people to make hard decisions of who they are. Questions of identity seems to be the order of the day. Professor Anand Singh, you are the professor of anthropology at UKZN, social commentator, you're a lecturer, you're a teacher, and you've been sharing your views on different social media platforms globally. Welcome to the program today. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to share this moment with you guys.
Thank you so much.
Just to focus upon my own personal interest as an academic, my special interest is on the Indian diaspora, with specific reference to the South African chapter of the diaspora globally. Your first question around what actually led to the riots and the violence that took place. I'll try to be as brief as possible because there are several people that are part of this here. You cannot root this to just one aspect. It's a complex range of issues. But at the start of it, the root cause of this here is not just one factor, but two interlinked factors. One is the massive unemployment and the sheer lack of vision on the part of leadership to be able to create opportunities for those who are marginalized, unemployed, or underemployed. And as long as you get this kind of lack of vision from the state, and coupled with that is the extent of looting of taxpayers' resources. There isn't a single ministry in the country that is not guilty of some form of offense against the taxpayers in this country and the people they are supposed to serve. When you have something like this, people feel absolutely justified in engaging in the kind of mayhem that we have just witnessed in your first video, for instance, because they've got nothing to lose, and they feel justified. People at the top are doing wrong. What is wrong in us doing wrong? And for that reason, the situation just worsens. There is a serious lack of leadership at a national level, as well as at a provincial level. The good thing about this particular, and I use the word good in quotation marks, this particular set of events was that it was mainly restricted to KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Johannesburg, because if it actually spread throughout the country, I'm not sure what we would have had left. Now, with respect to the Indians, my impression from the people that I was talking to was that by the time the fourth house was broken into and the fourth person was killed, and I don't know, I haven't been able to verify it yet, Phoenix residents decided to shut off its boundaries and to become very protective of what it was. The problem there is that there is a group of people at a national level who want to stage a coup and engage in economic sabotage in this country. And the result, with respect to the behavior of the people in Phoenix, is that I think they were forced, in the absence of the South African police services and the South African Defense Force, South African National Defense Force, is that in their absence, the residents of Phoenix decided to start engaging in a sense of moral policing. And that moral policing seemed to have hijacked unintentionally this economic sabotage and the subtle attempt to stage a coup in this country. I don't know how true this is, but when I try to put this evidence together, this is what it actually sounds like when it comes to my assessment of the situation. And I'll stop here for now.
Wow. Sure. I think the narrative has changed to show that the Indian community who murdered, the black brothers who had come in to the area, and those Indians who chose to defend their communities are now reflected as murderers. What are your thoughts on this subject?
That is mine. Yeah, you see, you got to understand that for the extent of the looting and damage that has taken place in KwaZulu-Natal and in the townships of Mamelodi, Alexandra, and Soweto, in Johannesburg, there ought to have been a very well-guided plan to have effected this. And the result is that people are terribly embarrassed by the ways in which the residents of Phoenix have actually stood up against this looting and voting. The result is that these people who are now hijacked have got no face. They don't know how to answer questions around this carnage that they've led and created. And they need some kind of diversionary tactic to call the residents of Phoenix murderers is nothing but a diversionary tactic from the failure of this economic sabotage that they have engaged in. I have no doubt about this, and I'll stand and say it on any platform.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you, Professor Anand Singh. I want to move to Srimati Anita Hariram. Anita ji is one of the staunch leaders of the Hindu Sevika Samiti in Phoenix. She's a member of Hindasa. She's a member of many spiritual organizations as well. And she's on the ground. She's one of the few stalwarts that has been involved in relief operational programs in the last few days, when the aftermath of the looting had led South Africans in KZN not to even have bread or the basic essentials the next day. And Anita ji, are you here?
Yes, I am.
All right. I think your video is frozen a little. Can you just put your camera on?
Okay, you can hear me though, right?
I can hear you, yes. All right. So I'm going to just pose some questions to you. You're from one of the largest townships, of predominantly Indian people in South Africa, and that's in Phoenix. And you were at the heart of what was actually going on during that very turbulent time of Saturday evening, and then, moving into Sunday and then Monday. Can you share with us from an eyewitness account of what prevailed? How did your communities come together? What mechanisms did you use in order to communicate? And how did you know that the communities have to be prepared? Because a lot of messages went on social media, a lot of fear. And at the same time, one also needs to be wary of social media with levels of exaggeration. But how did the community prepare at that particular point in time?
Okay, namaste everybody. Sorry, I'm not sure why my camera is freezing, but the voice is most important. I'm Anita Hariram. Like Yashika ji introduced me, in one small package is this different type of a person. But yeah, so look, at the end of the day, I live in Phoenix and been here now for 39 years, and coming to the stage where we've been labeled, and everywhere you go, people are saying, "Oh, you live in Phoenix. Oh, okay, fine. Is it safe to be there anymore?" So the perception of Phoenix has changed so much, and I wouldn't say it's embarrassing to be a resident in Phoenix, but what is disappointing is how we all have been painted with the same brush. Yes, our community had to take action. They had to be in the front line because it's been all over now that we've had lack of the SANDF, we have had lack of SAPS. The only people that were at our beck and call was our private security companies who we could rely on. But let's just, okay, I live here in Palmview. How do I know what is happening in another area? So what had to happen is that we had to strategize, and we had to be on so many group chats just to know what is happening, like for instance in Darfur, what is happening in as you know, Phoenix is made up of 26 units, right? And I live in one of them, and I'm one of 26 units. Now, how do you keep an eye on what's happening in all these 26 units is going to be impossible. So what we did was,
Anita ji, your audio is poor.
First of all, for our little unit. So in other words, your the road that I live in. Sorry?
Your audio is breaking up. Can I come back to you? I'll go to Naren Bhai, and then I will come back to you. Will that? I think that may help you. All right. That was Anita Hariram, and she was sharing how the communities had galvanized at a particular point in time. I just hope she gets her audio and video right, at least even if it's audio, because it's important to for our viewers and listeners to understand the people who are living who lived in the areas and who are living in the areas, and their first hand account of what took place. So I now move on to Brother Naren Ganesh. He is also a social commentator. He's been an activist, a political activist in the 80s, and he's also very concerned as to what is happening in his community, in the country at large, and also within the folds of our dharma. Because if our dharma speaks to the principle of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, and what has happened in the last week has tested every ounce of the Hindu. Naren Bhai, welcome to the studio today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Namaste, Yashika ji, and namaste to the panel and to the audience.
Thank you. So we've been listening to a little bit of the timeline. We've been looking at some of the basic theories of how this event started, which officially being reported from June 29th, when the decision was made to have the former president Jacob Zuma arrested, and then the events that led up to that. But nobody ever could have envisaged such mass, levels of violence. The killings, all these things that has taken place to keep communities apart rather than together. What is your take on what happened in those moments? And you from Duff's Road in Durban. How did you prepare, and how did you know that that the looting was actually starting to take place? Can you share with us your personal experience, Bhai?
Yeah, look, you're right about one thing. No one expected what had happened to have happened, and the exact start of the rioting will probably be subject to an inquiry. But as a timeline, we have to look at the Zuma incident. From what turned out to be a political protest, if we could even call it that, it rapidly escalated into mayhem. And as the orgy of attacks on businesses began, Then the orgy of looting and gratuitous criminality escalated. And from that horrendous period, which saw South Africa being embarrassed internationally for the degradation of once a beautiful country, the darling of the world, as it were, the ugly head of racism took root. How it led to the racial aspect, I am at a loss as well, because communities like Phoenix, like Duff's Road, which are contiguous to so-called previously black areas, and we can harp as much as we want in the apartheid era where they put Indians as buffers between the racial groups. It matters least now in the new South Africa. But why and how it still is the way it happened is mystifying. And there have been calls for an independent judicial inquiry, another waste of taxpayers' monies. But it is important to get to the root of the disaster. And I'm sure in time we will, in many aspects, but the surprise, the shock, and the manner in which it caught communities is still lingering. People are at a loss as to understand why and how it reached the levels that it did. And so am I.
And you were there, you've been with people that are close to your families and friends that actually saw a whole lot of people, participate in the riots. You've seen the burning from where you were. Can you share some of those moments?
Yeah, on the night of the morning of the 16th, it was like most areas in the greater Durban area. We had patrol teams, monitoring teams, surveillance teams, and Duff's Road, which is a little suburb on a hilltop, which is adjacent to KwaMashu, and which has a lot of houses and stuff like that. Just around 2 minutes past midnight, we began hearing the chant of the war cry chant. And without exaggeration, as teams started to mobilize, within 5 minutes of that time, there was an attack on the first house that was immediately close to the railway station that divides the two areas. And if I tell you that a random shooting began, and there were about 3 police vehicles at that point in time stationed, the public order policing. They tried to fend off the rioters who were trying to come into the area to burn and loot and whatever they intended to do. But unfortunately, after about 15 to 20 minutes, the public order policing actually retreated. And from what I understand, it was because of lack of ammunition, which is probably the scariest thing you'd hear in terms of our law enforcement. But be that as it may, the citizens, the men of the area who were armed, held fort by firing back. But by that time, the house that had been petrol bombed was down to ruins. And this carried on, the standoff carried on till the early hours of the morning, till about 4 o'clock, when there was a second attack in the area. My house, I was shot at from no further than 25 to 30 meters, where some of the looters stole a vehicle, a bakkie, and we retreated to a higher ground for those of us who were not armed, and fired shots at us. How he missed, only someone upstairs will know. But my house personally was shot at. There's bullet holes there. I've sent it on social media. But the thing is, the fear, the unexpectedness of this whole situation, I think caught everybody off guard. And it was potentially dangerous because we didn't know the extent of the mob. We didn't know the intention at that point in time, albeit that they were there to attack whatever was in their path. So it became a very scary aspect of this whole rioting situation. And just on a point of note, we were also affected in 1985. Just after the rioters attacked Inanda, they tried to attack Duff's Road. But that time, we were a little bit more prepared. In this instant, although we knew what was happening in Phoenix and surrounding areas, we least expected to be the target of attack at that point in time.
Sorry. You are, recounting such an incident that's so close to, to people because of the minutes and the moments that had taken place was reflected again, in Phoenix, Duff's Road, Chatsworth, to an extent in Pinetown, Marin Hill that we saw the video. So I want to ask the question, and you've we will not know until the full investigation is done, and we hope that it'll be taking into account eyewitness accounts, and and without any fear, and that people are able to share their stories, where justice will need to prevail. We have also been hearing some witness accounts to say that people started WhatsApp groups. The security companies were immediately patrolling the area. They were then sending messages to the communities, who then formed separate groups. Anita Ben, you are here, you're back here, right?
Oh,
thank you so much. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. So Anita, you're clear now. Just as Bai was explaining what happened in Duss Road, and nobody knew that the escalation will reach that level, and he compared it to Inanda before, where people had some kind of knowledge, and some preparation, but here it was completely, it's taken people by surprise. How did the community then respond? So after the first level of shooting, and the bombs, the explosions going off, in Konubia, how did you on the ground respond, and what happened to the people in the community? What happened to the older people? Can you share that experience?
So, obviously, and of course, everybody started being frantic, and everything was in a mayhem, and nobody knew what to do, where to go. So we formed little groups, and we shouted each other, and we tried to comfort each other the best we could. So if you look at the situation in Phoenix that happened, especially at Mandela Park. Now, from where I live, Mandela Park is like about I'd say a K away from me. And you think that, okay, a K away from me doesn't make a difference. But remember, these guys were coming in droves, all right? And when we got news of that, because I border, Palmview borders an informal settlement, which
I
is
think you're breaking up
Relisha, and they were
again.
state of fear. Okay, I'm not sure. All right. So everybody was in a state of fear. And what we then did is we formed little groups in every road of our districts. We formed little groups, we formed little get-togethers, and we said, right, all the ladies inside one house. Like if you take my road, for instance, it's a small road, and the same way we have little roads in this area. And all of you said, all right, in order for us to be all safe, let's all get into one house, all ladies and children in one house, all the men out in the streets. And that's exactly what happened. And the whole night we were like in fear. So when the police eventually, I mean, they all started to just be calm a little bit and relax. And this is so vivid in my mind. This is so vivid in my mind. We just made coffee and popcorn to freshen up the guys. And just a minute past midnight, we hear gunshots again. We hear gunshots, and we hear that guys are trying to infiltrate Palmview through the riverside. The river now the river separates Venetia and Palmview, right? And we heard now that these guys, and all of a sudden everybody's in a frantic again. And you can imagine now, I mean, you're sitting calmly, your nerves are calm down. All of a sudden you're in this jumpy situation. So, really, it's to experience that. I mean, I was very little when the Inanda riots and the 1985 riots and things like that. I can't remember much, but this is like really from what I heard, it's just outplaying all. Government really can't live in a society.
Thank you, Anita ji. Thank you for sharing that. And I know it is still, a situation where people are in fear. But yet, today there's been a lot of, different communities coming together to try and help support the victims. The trauma has just begun, and people don't realize that, after a terrible situation, the post-traumatic stress syndrome happens much, much later and has a much longer impact. I want to ask Professor Anand now that the situation that was just described by Anita ji and Naren Bhai, and of course others, who've been caught up in this violence, has been compared to the 80s violence in Inanda, has also been compared to the 1949 riots. And my dad, they live in Shallcross, and he saw the guys go to the neighbor's house and they were, damaging the windows and everything. And he was remembering that as a child because they were in Ketamana, and those memories kept flooding back. And what happens to old people now? What happens to, people who've lived through violent experiences? You've been studying these different passages in the life of the Indian community. How would you respond to this?
Yeah, I did a fair amount of research a couple of years ago. Some thoughts do come back to mind with respect to the 1949 and 1985 disturbances. We must bear in mind about one thing, that the 1949 Indo-African riots, in 1985, it was nothing but a sense of ethnic cleansing of the Indian community from Inanda. And what has happened in the last month is more of a sideshow than what was really intended. What I'm saying is that in each instance, there was a very different political set of circumstances that led to these clashes. And, you compare just now the 1985 so-called riots with what has happened within the last month here. You see, my understanding of what happened in 1985 was that there was a negotiation between the Inkatha Freedom Party, the House of Delegates, and P.W. Botha's band in trying to stretch KwaZulu, the homeland of the Zulus, up to the point of Inanda. They were actually trying to keep them away from the coastal area. Remember, in 1985, nobody died. In this past month, people have died, because the purpose really was to simply remove Indians from Inanda so that it becomes part of the National Party's grand design of what would have constituted the homeland for the Zulus. However, the situation here presently is something quite different, in that the steps that were taken by, I believe, the orchestrators, and I believe that this was a very planned event for the simple reason that when people marched to the stores or drove to the stores, they did so very confidently. When they stole from those stores or the storehouses, they did so very confidently. And that was because they knew that there was not going to be either the South African National Defense Force or the South African Police Services. Now, when you look at how people actually marched towards these chain stores or the shopping malls or moved around. What really happened here was that they had protection and guarantees, virtual guarantees from people that the law and order machinery would actually be kept away. Neither the president could answer for it, nor the Minister of Defense or anyone else. Going to stores by the thousands and driving in with vehicles by the hundreds and simply taking away, it's fine. In fact, people would empathize with those who steal food because they are trying to survive. But when you steal mattresses, televisions, computers, and lounge suites and bedroom suites, what has that got to do with hunger? It's got nothing to do with hunger. So, to that extent, these people or the looters were no better than a bunch of thugs who simply reacted to a situation that was prompted by people who have a totally different agenda. The 1985 riots, people were bussed in from different areas. Africans and Indians lived side by side in Inanda without a problem. They were all shipped to Phoenix, and around 1989, 1990, I had done some research amongst the households there. I was shocked. 2-bedroom houses built by the municipalities were owned by one family and rented out by 2 others. It became a source of income because so many of the Indians were actually unemployed. There is this misnomer that South African Indian community has really made it big and are generally very successful. But when more than 50% of the population of any community or country is unemployed, there's nothing to be proud about. And you cannot say that Indians in this country really made it to the point where they are far better off than blacks. That is not true. It is absolutely untrue. When you get something like a couple of 100,000 people living in Phoenix, in a sub-economic underclass township, and another several 100,000 in Chatsworth, people, many of whom have actually made it, but they do not. That many does not constitute the majority. Indians, by and large, in South Africa are not middle class. They are the furthest thing away from middle class. And they too are struggling like Africans. And this is a point that Africans and Indians recognize among themselves. That is why I can guarantee you now that if you drive into Phoenix, you will see Africans and Indians coexisting without a problem. In Chatsworth, the same thing is the case. What we had was people being bussed in, driven into Phoenix and Chatsworth as instigators to actually start trouble among the local people, to loot whatever shops they possibly could, to break into as many houses as they possibly could, to make it look like a race riot. But in actual fact, it wasn't that. It's not the way I see it. Because if that really is this sense of deep-seated hatred between Indians and Africans, it would never have ended within a week. It would not have ended within a week. And you would not have Indians and Africans walking through each other's areas so freely. There are people behind these activities who have a totally different agenda at a national level. And that is what we need to really guard against, because this country hasn't really settled down yet. Until we have a visionary leadership, we're going to continue to have unemployment at a rate that is going to really lead to far more greater problems than we've just experienced.
Thank you, Professor Anand, for actually putting it quite clearly and giving us clarity on the different events. I think it's important that this narrative is filtered across the global community, because it's too often very easy to say this is a race issue and and then we become part and parcel of campaigns like Black Lives Matter, etc. And Naren bhai, I'd like to come to you next. And it's often been seen where communities have been disenfranchised due to mass levels of poverty, etc., that the terminology are only applied to certain communities who are suffering and not to others. So if you take, for example, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, is it certain groups only that should be given the term that they are suffering, or can others also suffer in the same breath? And one shouldn't label somebody who's suffering because he comes from a particular community. Don't you think that the events of the last 2 weeks have shown a different side to poverty, to and to what violence can do to a society that would normally live peacefully side by side, as Professor Anand just said?
I agree with that. And just to respectfully correct Professor Anand, there were lives lost in the 1985 uprisings in Inanda. It was not really as many as we've heard of with regards to the latest event. But yeah, look, the economic aspect, politics is about power. Power is about the economy, and the economy is about the people. Because if you do not have a viable and functional economy at the levels that people anticipate it to be, you will always going to get dissent, unrest, etc. And unemployment, food security, the increased poverty, increased crime are all going to be a plethora of items that's going to be put into, as we call it, the biryani mix in the months and years to come ahead. And this creates a cascading but a deleterious effect on the economy. And there can be no doubt about that. I'm firm in my mind about that we're going to see further upheaval as the days go by. And this lends impetus to the fact that South Africa will be paying a high price in years to come for just 2 weeks of madness. And notwithstanding the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still wreaking havoc on all fronts currently, this actually escalated to a different level. But one has to look at it with an open mind. Did the Indian community suddenly wake up in the morning with an epiphany and decide, well, it's time to attack our black compatriots? Methinks not. And the notion that the Indian community is labeled as racist must be dispelled with the contempt it deserves. Whoever created such a label needs to understand that with any generalization, there will always be an element of truth in it, but only to a certain extent. Stories of unfair treatment by Indian and black citizens abound in many forums where they are used to raise the ire and the temperature of the audience. And such rhetoric is being spewed. And the unemployment, as Professor Anand Singh alluded to, is going to be across the board with the damage to the infrastructure in many businesses. This repercussion is going to be extended way beyond 2021 and even 2022. The impotence of our government, and rightfully said again by Professor Singh, is that they are not visionary. I've been openly critical about the government of President Ramaphosa. I believe he's a lame duck president. If he acted expeditiously with the ability of a with presidential ability, he would have deployed the security forces to the provinces, because I'm more than certain that he would have had intelligence that there was something brewing. That he didn't. And even while the looting was going on, we have a depleted and an ineffective police force throughout the country, which is scary. He didn't see it fit to deploy the army. And when he said he did, we hardly saw them. So we are in a situation that is going to be compounded multiple fold in the days coming by. The thing is, it's important to be critical, but we also need to look at solutions in the same breath, because
absolutely,
the ineptness. Okay, sorry.
No. I think it's excellent that the deconstruction of the mayhem has to be done in order for anyone to take the next levels, to journey towards a space of peace. But I would like you to continue with that thought, and then I was going to ask you the question: how can we then provide solutions to the situation that we find ourselves in? Is there practical opportunity for people to share their voices so that the vent of frustration is dealt with, so that a rebuilding can actually occur?
Yeah, look, the truth is, until 3 weeks ago, there was no real problem between the so-called Black and Indian communities. We lived, there might have been the occasional problem, and that was fine. It happens in all communities. But I believe this narrative that often muddies the waters for reconciliation and social cohesion on many fronts, and with regards to many communities, must stop, firstly. Because at the end of the day, if we continue with the rhetoric, we perpetuate the narrative, the discourse becomes muddied, and people will act on it. And I cannot overstate the need for that. Else we will keep on stirring this Macbethian cauldron over and over again. There's a famous saying or observation by a man called Edmund Burke, who said, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I think that should be our point of departure for every single citizen, because nobody wants conflict. And we should all stand up against injustice, unfairness, and the evils of life. And the solutions come about at grassroots. It does not come about at government level. Our government is totally inept and incapacitated to actually handle the problems on the ground. They are so caught up with fighting themselves. They say when two elephants fight, the grass is the victim and we are the grass. So our solution is to, build forums between communities. In my area, there's a little piece of open land which I've suggested that citizens from the other side, as I would call it for the time being, and our community build a garden of peace. That means we will be getting about 10 citizens from either side to develop the garden, grow vegetables, and share it amongst the community. It might be a start. How successful it will be, time will tell. But those are the kind of initiatives we need to take on between communities to say, look, we are citizens of the country. We are, as our constitution reads, we, the people. It does not read we, the Black people, we, the white people, we, the Indian people. It's we, the people. And that common humanity has to be extended way beyond just color. And I think that's our starting point.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think you've answered a dual question in terms of how we should not perpetuate the narrative that the basis of social cohesion is based on the fact that people, who have been accused of being racist must now come and say, yes, now I'm racist, and therefore I will now take the next step to reconciliation. I think it's very key to dismiss, these false narratives that have been perpetuated in social media. And I think social media also had a huge role to play. It was surprising even, and it is still surprising, that people are not blocked on Facebook and Twitter, where masses of hate speech against the community is put out. It's not just one or two posts, it's massive amounts. And also doctored images, doctored videos. What is your take on it? And I'd also like to ask that same question to Anita Ji in a few minutes.
Look, that's true. Social media has been the source of misinformation, disinformation, creating fake news, expanding the hullabaloo that's going on. But I truly believe that our solutions lie within ourselves, because we see ourselves in difference. We should be seeing ourselves in similarity. It's so important. I use that line very often only because I need to perpetuate the notion that we are all made of the same cloth. We might be different in religion, ethnicity, etc. But in South Africa lately, in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng lately, it's your last name that makes the difference, whether you're Indian or Black. And that has created a kind of division that is desperately, desperately dangerous for the country. So in terms of how we move forward and discard well, you're right, social media should have banned these kind of nonsense that goes on, because I experienced it on the night of the attack in my area. People were saying things were calm when we were in the middle of a gunfight. People were saying, it was an elderly Indian couple's house that was petrol bombed. People were saying that it was a black couple. So it becomes quite dangerous when social media is used and abused at the same time, more especially in a situation like the one we faced recently. And, I cannot not quote Gandhiji when he says, you must not lose faith in humanity. Humanity is like an ocean, because if a few drops of the ocean are dirty, it does not make the ocean dirty. And it's so important to look at that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Anita ji, just on that point, Gandhi ji was very instrumental in South Africa, in the Inanda area and Phoenix area. And not only he came here as a lawyer, but he became the Mahatma in essence. And yet, as people have lived, in harmony, he himself, when he started the Indian Congress, it is often said that that became the basis of the struggle for freedom with the ANC at a point in time. So, what are your thoughts on believing in, having the faith in humanity again? Because a lot of people have been lost, they've been traumatized, they can't even begin to reconcile, picking up the pieces from a physical perspective. Their homes, their shops have been damaged, etc. And you've been talking to people on the ground. You've actually been more of an eyewitness reporter in many senses. Please share those stories, and and also, is there a way forward?
Okay, talking about the Mahatma, I share a birthday with him, so obviously I have great passion. Look, Mahatma Gandhi ji prophesied ahimsa. But in this point in time, we all wanted to still stick by ahimsa. But when it came to a certain point where you're pushed in a corner and you're trying to protect your family, what do? You work with the only vices that you have, and that is to do whatever, come what may. With regards to, I just want to go back a little bit to what Naren Bhai was saying with regards to social media and stuff like that. Yes, that also pushes boundaries. It gives you information that sometimes puts you in a panic state, or sometimes it calms you, or sometimes it says all sorts of stories. So we need to be we need to be more vocal out there on social media, but at the same time, the authors in social media need to come out and say that, this is my own saying. But we stuck behind voice notes and stuff like that, so that can also give a wrong narrative there. The other thing is what we can do with regards to having faith in humanity again. Look, having faith in humanity, people have not stopped. No, they have this faith. And that's why when we were doing the Seva project, you could see that people out there want to live their lives again. And like Narenji mentioned, 2 weeks ago, we didn't have this problem. 2 weeks ago, we were fine. 2 weeks ago, people from the informal settlements were coming into our places. We were going there. We were sharing the pandemic of COVID-19. Is our government failed us. That's what happened. Our government failed us. Now, what our government is supposed to be doing, here you get civilians going and making the wrong right. Like if you look at today, like Narenji says now, they're building a peace garden, right? 2 weeks ago, we didn't need a peace garden, right? Today in Phoenix, we're having a peace soccer match, right? But we had soccer matches in East Berry every week. Every week we had soccer matches in Phoenix. It was people of all colors were there. People of different communities were there. Now, all of a sudden, we must make right what the government did wrong. And again, now does it mean now that we don't have a government? Is this not the work of the government to say, right, we need to form pieces, this is what we're going to be doing, right? But again, we took the bull by the horn and we said, no, we want to live in peace, we want to live in harmony, and we need to take our communities back. We need to give our people a smile on their faces. We need to bring back this peace. And how we go about doing it, we said, okay, fine, we can reach out to communities, reach out to people, and that's how we're picking up the pieces. But it's not easy.
Absolutely. You know, we've often said that the struggle continues, and you've been so involved recently, and in fact, even the next day, you know, with distribution of hampers, ensuring that that civil society becomes pivotal. I think in a matter of moments, the entire country was galvanized in sending food from the different provinces, in planes being chartered just to get relief and aid, you know, to communities. Even as we speak right now, the Indian community, in fact, the Hindu community specifically, and a lot of this has not been known in social media. And perhaps maybe Professor Anand can respond to that. Why do our Hindus be quiet when they do, you know, voluminous amounts of seva? You know, they're constantly in the forefront in spite of the bashes that they've had. They've put that aside. They've went ahead to the poorest of the poor communities that they've served before, and they're continually serving because those same communities who've hit them have come to ask for help, and they're continually doing that. The Ramakrishna Movement, World Hindu Foundation, Hindasa, you know, Arya Samaj Movement, to name a few. I mean, like every single Hindu organization has been in the forefront. It isn't just with some particular communities only. What is the sense of resilience that we have as Hindus, that we will strive, that we will continue? Is it our innate evolutionary, spirit that we have?
Thank you, Yashika. You know, that's a very emotive question for me because, like you as well, I'm sure we've all been brought up to think that if somebody comes to your house or if you take someone out for lunch or dinner, you don't go and talk about it. You give somebody something to eat, you don't talk about it. And sadly, I had to, and I think Naren is on this group as well. There was somebody who was promoting a particular religion and saying how great they were, how much work they were doing. And I had to step in immediately and say to them to please stop using this social media platform to promote your religion, because Hindus as well are also doing things, and it is in the spirit with which you do things that actually counts rather than how much you do. Whatever little somebody can do is worth as much as whatever a bigger amount of effort could be, because people are doing things within the confines of their resources or however much they can actually contribute. It's not because one religion can do more than another. And I think Hindus must continue to be able to do the work quietly and honestly with a sense of commitment that we are known to have. You know, when I first joined the university in 1977, my first experience with a boycott at University of Durban Westville, there was Alan Payton and MJ Naidu and one or two others who were already in the hall. And Chief Gacha Buthelezi came in to the university, but they didn't allow him to come anywhere near the G5 hall. Those of you who are familiar with the university structure on the Westville campus. That was the biggest lecture hall at that particular time. There was no T block then. And they stopped Gacha Buthelezi from coming in. And what was his alleged reaction? Was that he will bring his impies to wipe out the coolies from here. It appeared in the Daily News on the very same day. And the Broederbond and the Afrikaners had a damn big laugh at the Indians for trying to play as progressive as they did. But if you look at the level of maturity, political maturity, and the commitment that Chief Gatsa Buthelezi now has today, and the respect that he has for the Indian community, is because of what the Divine Life Society and the Ramakrishna Center have been doing to build schools, clinics, and engagement in agricultural activities without pomp and splendor, without the kind of popularity,
popular social, popular media impact.
Sorry, I'm just stuck for words at the moment. I'm sorry, I don't want to use the name of any other organizations, but I think you might very well attach. Every time something is happening, a particular group from a particular religious background gets the honor for doing something. If you put whatever the Hindus are doing together with what that organization is doing, I wouldn't be surprised that the Hindus are actually doing far more. But Chief, if you look at what statement he made in 1977 and what he said actually a month ago to defend the Indian community, it is poles apart, because the man has grown to know that Hindus, when they do things as an offering to God, you are not supposed to advertise it, because God knows what you are doing. But I want to comment on something that you raised earlier, that you asked Naren and Anita. I feel a bit left out with respect to how we can actually find solutions to this.
Yes.
You know, in 1995, when the RDP document came out, it was supposed to be a solution that was going to set South Africa right. At that particular time, those of you who remember Jay Naidu and his ministry of that ran the RDP program, Jay Naidu actually ended up having more power than the president himself. I've heard that through people who are close to Mandela and others. And, you know, he had a very quiet exit from the cabinet after that first term of office of Mandela. And the only term, of course. Now, when I saw that RDP, before it could even start being implemented, I commented to one of my colleagues. Now, this was something like, 27 years ago. I was much younger. I didn't even have a single gray hair on my head. And I can tell you, I looked at the RDP and I said to them, this entire thing is an urbanization model. It costed at that time 250,000 Rand per job to create in an urban area. If you got 5 million people coming down from the rural areas spread throughout the country, living in squatter camps, you multiply 5 million by 250,000 Rands, where is South Africa going to get that kind of capital to be able to create jobs in an urban area? In all its urban areas, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
The point that I'm making is that if we as people of Indian origin want to contribute towards the solutions in this country, we've got a lot to learn from the way in which the Indians in India are actually doing employment in the rural areas. What we have in comparison to countries like China and India in South Africa is a rarity, and that is agricultural space. It will not cost much to create farms, and Naren has already talked about building a peace farm. Can you imagine if it costs 30,000 Rands to actually to build a house, when so many of those residents are not staying in those houses because they're renting it out to somebody else to get an income, and many of them are going and staying in the squatter camps where they don't have to pay anything, and then they're getting free water, and then they are also stealing electricity from the boxes in the nearby areas where the residents are actually paying for their electricity, right? Which is why we keep getting these escalations. We cannot afford, and the first solution in this country would be to try to emulate an agriculturally based model where we start redistributing resources to rural development and shifting people away from the urban areas into rural development and giving them incentives so that we no longer suffer from food insecurity. The post-apartheid era has one major characteristic to its record, and that's what the Nationalist Party supporters actually laugh at in this era. And that is, we were never food deficit during the apartheid era. But in the post-apartheid era, we are. We need to change that. And we would need to start reinvesting and redirecting a good deal of our resources back to the rural areas, rebuild the households and the communities in order to try and create peace and stability in this country.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. In fact, when we speak to rural development, some of the visionaries that come to mind is Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who himself has seen, the masses of suffering that has existed in his country for the longest period in different rules, and re-looked at the concept of, Ekal Vidyalay, for example, the one teacher, one village concept, where people don't need to leave their environment to go into a city, but that they can have all these resources necessary for education at the highest level, whilst remaining in that environment and understanding the nature of that environment. We've been too often, put into boxes, into a very colonialist and capitalist model, and we've forgotten the opportunity to actually reach and to go back. And I think that is one of the key visions that he has for Africa, because he sees Africa as an agricultural land that still has virgin soil, where we can grow, seed that is not GM seeds, that is original seed, and that can be the food secure space for the rest of the world. While Europe is now suffering with acid rain, etc., Africa is the land that can actually grow and become prosperous if one has strong leadership and vision, and it can be the food house for the world. I hope that can, actually materialize with people with good values, with characters that put themselves away, just like Mandela did. It was not about him. It was about the rest, it was about others. And do you think that our teachings in our Shastras speak to this principle of selflessness, speaks to the principle of recognizing the essential divinity in others, so that we can actually grow together?
Absolutely. And this is what we as Hindus need to contribute towards. Incidentally, I participated in a Ministry of External Affairs webinar on Friday with respect to strengthening India's ties with Africa. And there was participation from countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, and of course here in South Africa. And I was like the South African rep. And, the one thing that they emphasized was the issue of agricultural contracts. When you engage people on a contractual basis between two parties that have some sense of mutual benefit, you leave out the very senior politicians who are largely responsible for the ciphering of money and resources from those departments. And it was people from Africa that were saying it. Both Kenya and Nigeria emphasized this point. I said it in a slightly different way, where we have to go down to grassroots level. And when you look at the principle of working together for mutual benefit, it is intrinsic to what the Shastras are actually preaching. And this is what Narendra Modi is doing. This is the basis upon which Hindutva, and I'm not afraid to say this because I know people are going all out to run down the concept of Hindutva, simply because it is an ideology that is going to replace the major ideologies in the world. And going to be retiring by the end of next year. I'm actually finishing, or I've started a book on the search for a new ideology. Socialism only lasted 50 years. Capitalism lasted less than 100 years. Globalization lasted no more than 20 years. Christianity through the Catholic Church lasted a couple of 100 years until secularism actually survived. There are other religions, I don't want to mention names and create mayhem right now, but other religions are on the way down. The more aggressively people from particular ideological perspectives react to what they are confronted with, the more it actually tells you about how little they have left in terms of the influences in the world that they have. But when you read through what universalism prevails in the writings of Hindutva, Hindutva is not Hinduism. People must get that right. Although the principles of Hindutva are derived from Hinduism and the Shastras, they have inbuilt into them universalisms that will appeal to any community of any ethnic or religious background without having to make people compromise on what their religious or localized beliefs are all about. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Professor Anand, for putting it so clearly. I think, from the comments that are coming in now from social media, a lot of people are saying that they're enjoying the conversation right now, but they're also asking some questions around, achieving peace and how can we actually go through this, because it's going to be a long road ahead. Anita ji, from your perspective, you're a Hindu worker. You've been through the trenches in the last 2 weeks, and you've seen your community being redefined in so many ways. Yet there's a spirit that's prevailing within the community themselves. They have stood up and they've been courageous, but at the same time, they have the ability to stand against all odds. And that is the spirit, the true spirit, within the religion, within our faith itself. What are your thoughts on that?
If you had to walk around the streets of Phoenix right now, this moment, it's been labeled this Phoenix massacre and stuff like that. That narrative must really change now. Because if you walk into the streets of Phoenix right now, you will see people that have picked up the pieces and they've moved on. And I think as a community, as a community in Phoenix, we've always been I wouldn't talk only about Phoenix. I think let's just talk about Asians. Let's just talk about Indians. I think we've been able to pick up the pieces from wherever. No matter how hard we fell, we've been able to pick up the pieces. And you will see that in Phoenix today. People have high spirits. They're motivated. The groups that we are in, every morning we're motivating each other that, guys, don't believe whatever you see on social media. Don't believe whatever you listen to on social media. Let's just pass that. Let's pray. All we're saying is let's pray. Let's come together. And guys, if you need help, we are here. If you need anything, we are here. We in this together. And that's the spirit that is going on. Like you mentioned, many of us are doing seva out there. Hindu organizations, in the past week, World Hindu Foundation, Hindasa, APS, we've been doing feeding. And let me tell you something, we are not discriminating. Anybody that comes into the queue for a plate of food, we are not saying, no, you created a havoc over here, we're not giving. No, we are still 2 weeks before we were all together. Why this 2 weeks will now differentiate us? Why this 2 weeks will separate us? We're still coming together. We're still coming together. So the spirit in Phoenix, and I can tell you this much, is high, and we're saying that we're going to get this. And they're all saying, we got this, guys. We got this. We are going to be just as we were before 2 weeks.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being positive. Everyone is standing together now, and I think that's the call to our community. Let's stand together. Let's build. Let's push forward and look to a bigger future, because it's about the safety of our families, of our communities, and of the planet as well. Naren Bhai, in final words from you on this very difficult subject, what do you think that are some of the short next steps that we need to undertake as the Hindu community and as a community at large? Because it seems that the community is teaching governments, what to do on the ground right now.
Thank you, Yashika. Before I start that, I just want to mention that I'm the global Indian correspondent for the Global Indian series, and the director, who is in London, Mr. Rajan Nazran Singh, has started dialogue in the diaspora, and Professor Anand Singh might be interested in this. What's happening in South Africa is not unique. It's currently happening in Guyana, for example. There's black-white conflict, black-Indian conflict. It has happened in Trinidad, Tobago, Jamaica, in Fiji, in the Philippines. So this phenomena in the diaspora is quite worrying. But coming back to the thing about peace, one has to remember Mandela's words. It always seems impossible until it is done. And that's so true, because there's a lot of emotive influence in how we are looking at the perspectives that we have at the moment based on race, and it gets to the heart of a person. But I think if I look at one of my, I love looking at what people said in the past and how it can be used to influence the future. Robert F. Kennedy, the brother of the late John F. Kennedy, well, Robert himself is late, but in a speech to the young peoples of South Africa in 1966, he stated, "Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance." And this statement has so much of value and worth in our day, in the days today, because if we are looking for peace, forget your race, your color, your creed, your ethnicity, your religion, or what your last name is. And my belief is predicated on the stance of speaking out, and more importantly, acting on the fundamental of such credos as our Shastras do, to speaking the truth, to getting people to understand that we are no different from each other. We may live in a different area, we may look different, but we are the same. And I think that's the initial starting point from which our peace relations, sadly, we have to look at it as peace relations now, that should start. And, the political agenda will always be the bigger agenda, but that is not in doubt. But as I mentioned about the two elephants earlier on, we should go beyond that. We should extend our hand to every citizen of this country, not only black. We are citizens of color, classified racially, but we also have different perspectives on life. So we should start our peace making in our places of work, in the schools, and well, if it starts in the schools, so much better for the future. But I think that's where we should look at.
Excellent. It starts in the schools, and we need to take it to communities and eventually to the world. Professor Anand Singh, in your final statements for this morning's talk, I know it's something that we need to continue to do, and it isn't something that we should stop. But I think we've come a long way as a country, and we've also come with us. When the Indians arrived here, they arrived with scripture in one hand and a will to survive in the other. And it is this will and the values in our scripture that can fundamentally alter the changes in which we see in our country and the rest of the globe. Your final thoughts on that? Professor Anand, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. I think the sentiment that our forefathers came to in this country still prevails amongst us. Those of us who choose to be as Hindu as we possibly can, And the more Hindu you are, unfortunately for people who are on the left wing, there is this tendency to think that you are too conservative and racist, and unlike them who are progressive and open-minded. It's the furthest thing from the truth. We need to actually dispel those notions on the one hand, but on the other hand, we can make as much noise as we possibly can. Nobody is going to listen to us in this country because right now, as we stand, there are too many vultures who are out there to rip the taxpayer and the public of whatever resources we have. But we need to continue to work and to set examples about how we can achieve so much more with so little at our disposal. And the more we do this, the more we will be able to impress upon people the goodness with which and the good intention with which we wish to work. We want to take nothing away from them, especially their religious sentiments, but we want to give and share. And we still have that sentiment, that ability to do so. And I'm sure we will be able to accomplish that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. It has been absolutely phenomenal. And I think it is one part of the journey. It's a dialogue. It's a process in which we wanted to tap into the different energies that prevailed during this particular time, and to also take a step forward in rebuilding our country and rebuilding and shaping, or rather consolidating the relationships that we've had before into a brighter future. Thank you again. Namaste, Vanakkam, Namaskaram. I now hand over to Malaji, who will do the closing prayer. Is she here, Atek?
Yes. Namaste. We can just all close our eyes in prayer. Om Kapurgoram Karunavataram Sansarasaram Bhujagendraharam Sada Vasantam Hridayarvinde Bhavam Bhavani Sahitam Namami Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu Mangalam Garudadvaja Mangalam Pundari Kaksha Mangalaye Tanohari Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvad Sadke Sharanye Triambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Narayani Namostute Narayani Namostute Om Samastaloka Sukhino Bhavantu Samastaloka Sukhino Bhavantu Samastaloka Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you, Malaji.